In 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. This is Robert Linkle, Aging with Strength, episode number 15. We are going to talk about hip replacements and some of the techniques, strategies, the history behind, the thoughts behind, the whole process that you're going to go through if this is something that you're going to pursue or experience, some strategies that you can implement into your daily programming before you have surgery, and then also after. This is part one. We're not going to cover all that right now. So part one, we're just going to cover the basics, a couple of components for that, and then parts two and parts three will be coming out in the next couple of days. You'll be able to get a little bit more information about that as we go. All right, so really what's kind of spurring this whole thing is I had 3 hip replacements. I had 2 arthroscopies back in 2014, and then I had 3 hip replacements in 2016. I had my right one done in April, my left one done in August. 2 days later, it dislocated, and I had to have it redone entirely again. And so through my personal experiences and the clients that I've worked with, I've had really great opportunities to learn a lot about this, working with our physical therapist, Dan McLean, and his team to learn about the physical therapy side of things and just all the research and the education that I seek out to find the most efficient ways to help people get through this surgery, to the surgery, through the surgery, and then come back from that. We have a couple of clients that are currently going through this process or have recently gone through this process. We've had really good success, and we have a brand new client who just announced today that he's 8 weeks away from having his. So between other trainers and their clients that have kind of requested information, that's really brought us to this point to take this topic, this time, to really put this information out there. So the first thing that I wanted to go through was really what's happening when you have a hip replacement, and then some of the protocols we have to concern ourselves with, what to expect going through some of those processes. And then chapters 2 and 3, we'll get into more details. So really what's happened with the hip joint itself, it's a ball and socket joint. So we have a capsule, it's called the acetabulum, and then the head of the femur sits into that. And inside that head, inside that capsule, is your labrum. And if you think of like muscles inside of a clamshell, when you try to pry those two apart, the muscle is connected on each side. And that's creating a suction and muscular cohesion of the two bones to hold together tight. Now you have muscles and ligaments around the outside as well that are helping stabilize the joint. But as far as the internal pressure, the internal suction, if you will, of the head of the femur into the acetabular socket to hold in there, that labrum is vital. And what will happen is through a very fast range of motion, an exceeded range of motion, and overexertion. I've had people that have tried sumo deadlifts versus traditional they've always done, and the open exposure plus the hard contraction that they're putting together to try to deadlift more without progressing and building up to it, it's torn their labrum. Falls where they exceed ranges of motion will tear their labrum. And so something will happen in there, the labrum will get a tear, or they'll have massive misuse of the joint, which was my case. Really improper squatting techniques, excessive loading, no recovery periods, not really working on mechanics of the range of motion or finding any kind of muscular equality. I just overdid it and overtrained and just blasted my quads and didn't do any glute training, very minimal hamstring work, too much adductor work. So I wore away the stability of this joint. Or you have individuals that don't use this at all. They undertrain or have so severely been lacking in any kind of resistance in the joint. It's basically just deteriorating and falling apart. So you'll get arthritic components, you'll get osteoarthritic components that will come into here that will start to eat away, tear away, erode away the bones on either end, the head or the acetabular socket. And then the ligament itself on the inside, the labrum, will start to erode away, tear. Once that's gone, and you have like spongy degeneration of the bones on either side, those degenerations then rub onto the labrum that's still left, and it just shreds, it just tears it up and rips it to pieces. And by the time I had my arthroscopies, when my doc went in and saw that, he's like, your labrums are basically gone. I just cleaned up pieces that were left. We shaved some of the bone that was, bone spurred over. You'll get excessive ranges where the bone, the head of the femur, and then the trochanter area. As it will come up, it will continue to hit different parts, the ASIS, ASSI, the different tuberosities at the front of the hip. And because it's bone-on-bone contacts, your body will say like, hey, I need to put more deposits here, and it'll create a bone spur thinking that it's helping, but it's really hurting. And that'll lead to impingements and all kinds of other issues. So basically, we are our own worst enemy in not moving most efficiently or creating muscular quality. And this joint gets worn away really efficiently as far as how well it can wear itself out. So when they decide, okay, we're going to do a replacement or cleanup first, they'll try to do the cleanup, buy you as much time as you can. And now it's time for the replacement. So the new technique, this is going to be a little graphic, but the new technique is they will either through an anterior approach, which is really like anterior lateral, or a lateral posterior approach. It just kind of depends on the doctor and the circumstance. I didn't really get a great answer of exactly why one is selected over the other, but it gives you an idea of which approach they're going to take. Some are more muscle sparing, some are less likely to dislocate, depending on, I'm assuming, the individual, how active they are, what kind of muscular buildup they already have. So those are just my assumptions. I'm not really sure exactly about how the selection is made, but either way, a incision is made. Musculature that is really, really tight and not wanting to be elastic and stretch and to open is hooked and pulled apart, and pretty aggressively, because they need space to open all this up. And again, I'm going to get a little gross here. They go in, they dislocate the hip, they clear out the socket on the inside. They will actually cut off the ball of the femur. That'll be removed. They will then dig out a hole down the center of the femur where this piece will fit in, and they will fit it perfect. They'll put it in, come back, they'll mark it, they'll drill it, all this. There are very good graphics that show this and explain it more in a little more detail than I do. I couldn't bring myself to actually watch one. You can see them on YouTube, like a real surgery. I couldn't do it. I had a hard time squeamishly with my stomach watching the cartoon version of it, which was, to me, was making me queasy. So don't let me gross you out too much, but if you really want to see some other stuff, check it out on YouTube. So they will reinsert and redrill until this guy fits. And this is very serrated and it's all chewed up. It's very coarse, because once this is inserted and they hammer it in there, it's not really meant to come back out. And the serrated material is then supposed to graft to the bone, and it's going to basically grow together. That's why right after surgery, they want you up and moving and walking. They don't want you to just lay down and not put load on this. It needs the pressure to fuse basically the replacement into the bone. And so the sooner you get up and start putting vertical pressure on it, the more it's going to graft and kind of push that together. So once that's in, the capsule, acetabular capsule, it's chewed out and a cap is put in there, and that's hammered into place. So they hammer that in, the back of that is very serrated, and that's going to graft in. And then as those two pieces, the cap and the replacement, are now put together, the last thing they do is they put the little ball on, and it's just a plastic socket basically that sticks on there, and then they put that together. Now you no longer have a labrum, the clam muscle, right, that is going to hold this together tight. And then you have all these muscles that are supposed to be around there that are going to help stabilize that joint, but they're all stretched out. So there's a 90-day protocol at this point after the surgery, and really it's kind of a permanent protocol. You need to be careful of this, of dislocation. And it's because there's no longer labrum. So there's something called slippage, very technical term, where you have the cap that can kind of slide in here and slip out because there's no labrum in there creating that suction anymore. And then through really good physical therapy, you have to do good PT for this. You need to build the tension and the tightness and develop some more strength to all the muscles that have now been stretched. They need to recoil and to tighten back up around the hip, because that's what's going to now stabilize and hold this new head into the new socket. And in the very beginning, the first couple of weeks, really up to about 90 days, you have a dislocation protocol that you have to be leery of. So the first one is crossing the midline. If we are to stand with our feet even shoulder width apart and then cross our leg over, like if we're sitting with our feet up on an ottoman and you cross your feet like that, that little technique basically of it flexing at the hip and then crossing over the midline can pop this guy out. Because remember, you don't have the stability or the muscle stabilizers to hold this in there just yet, and we don't have the internal pressure of the labrum, right? So we are labrumless. So you can't cross your midline. Now, even for me now, I'm 3 years post. If I sit with my feet crossed for more than 25 minutes or so, my hips start to ache. And it's just because there's the long lever of the femur and the leg. When you cross them, there's a little prying of the two pulling apart. And if you're not engaged, then the musculature is not holding the new fake replacement into place. So if you're relaxing and it's crossed, it's kind of just gradually, easily sliding or trying to pull apart, creating slippage. And this is uncomfortable. So we got to be careful with that really forever. Doesn't mean that you can't cross your feet. It's just not going to be the most comfortable thing or the most stable thing for your hip. Okay. The second one, internal rotation. So if you have your feet like so, my feet are here, and I internally rotate my foot or pronated my foot out, that would be internal rotation of the hip. Can basically internally rotate and pop this guy out the back. Now, there are new replacements from what I understand that are still not commonly used, but it's coming. It's getting closer to where this head, this fake head, has a secondary head, a secondary cup that goes over it, and it's a catch. So the dislocation rate on this is really, really low because inside the capsule, imagine this hood with another hood over it that pivoted inside itself. So with my hands here, this is the head of the femur. There's another one that goes over that. And as this guy starts to articulate and move, if it gets anywhere into a position where it might start to dislocate, the second hood is then activated by a catch on the inside, and it will create a cap that will open with it. So if this was in the socket and I started to internally rotate, instead of this guy popping out the back, a secondary cap would catch with this. A secondary, like my other hand, would come around and it would close this joint and it would not let it come out. And then when I would come back, the secondary catch would come back and pull back into position. So it's almost like a backup hood, like a backup catch. And from what I understand, there are great success rates with this of not dislocating, but I read there were more instability issues. So greater emphasis needed to be placed on rehabilitation, especially active insufficiency. And we'll talk about that in part 3. So something to think about there. Anterior approaches, I know, have a greater opportunity to dislocate anteriorly, obviously. So if you get people that are a little bit more glute dominant, which is pretty uncommon for the most part, almost everybody's quad dominant, like doing a glute bridge and extending or even hyperextending through the hip, the head can just pop out the front since that was the direction the approach was directed. Now, the lateral approach, because we do so much rotating and twisting, there's a greater dislocation rate in that direction. And so that's a concern. Though mine was a lateral approach, my dislocation was anterior. And it was because of my cup placement. It wasn't a mistake necessarily of my surgeon. She put the cup where it belonged when I was knocked out. But from years and years and years of overmuscular development, rotating in one direction, I mean, I took hundreds of thousands of throws. When you're knocked out, I've always heard anesthesiologists say this all the time. When you're knocked out, everybody can do the splits, right? Your musculature lets go that much. But when you are engaged, when you're awake, your musculature is active, and you'll see, people that have one erector muscle of their back is much greater than the other because they always carry their bag on the opposite side, or one arm's more defined than the other. Tennis players have this, pitchers have this. So it's the same thing with us. But for my sport, I rotated and pivoted in one direction so many times that my hip on the left side could displace posteriorly really well, really strong, and block, while my right leg pivoted around that. And so that movement pattern and that development made it that anytime I went to sit up, I put my pelvis backwards and engaged my hip flexors and my abdominals to help me, and just pulled my hip forward, and it just popped right out. And so the new cup placement had to be moved forward and internally rotated a little bit so that when I did that, it wouldn't come out until I could rehabilitate myself strong enough to really make sure that was locked in a good place. So rehab for that was really, really difficult. Okay. So the internal rotation one has a special place in my heart of something that you definitely want to do. I still have little PTSD nightmares that my leg is disconnected and not able to move. And I wake up, grabbing at my leg to make sure it's still there. And I'm not meaning to be dramatic, but it's a really odd feeling when you're trying to articulate and move your leg and it just won't respond. It's a trip. So got stuck with me a little bit. And then your last protocol is 90 degrees flexion. which if you think about that, like washing below your knees, that you're going to be way below 90 degrees, putting on your shoes, putting on your socks, picking up anything off the floor, like eventually you're going to get to the point where you can do this to a pretty good range of motion. But we still have this concern because the musculature is really loose. You don't have a labrum, that as you flex from the hip, as I move, like I'm hinging forward or bowing, or if I sit down in a chair and I bring my leg up and I go to cross it across me, that deep flexion plus the external rotation, any of that I add, as I get to 90, the degree and the extension of this, it starts to pry a little bit from the bone, or the replacement in this case, hitting the pelvis, and it'll start to pry out and it'll dislocate, typically posterior, as that'll occur. So you have to be really careful with that. They give you these little replacement kits where it's it looks like one of those little pooper scoopers, like the shovel, and then you have the scoop, and you pull the poop, and it looks like the shovel, like the scooper. And so you take that scooper and you pull your sock over it, and then you slide your foot in where you would shovel the poop to, and then you pull your sock back through that, and it like slips your sock on for you. They give you that. They give you a little horn for you to be able to slide your shoes on without hinging over, or you just, they don't want you to wear sandals because now you're trying to walk with a walker or with a cane with shoes that can slip off your feet and then you fall. So you need shoes that will secure onto your feet, but it's really difficult to do that yourself. So that's something to be concerned with as well. I could go on and on about all this and these things. I'm going to save some of this for our next couple chapters. I hope you're enjoying this. I hope this is something you can learn a pretty decent amount from. Next time, we're going to talk about all kinds of different exercises you can do before you have your surgery to really help get all the musculature in this area good and strong, and actually a little bit overly tight, because we want to be able to rehab that back knowing that it's going to get loosened up. But different stabilizers, different muscle groups we're going to train in there. I'll also give you a couple more stories about my experiences, things that I did to help get ready for this. And then we will talk about post-op. But it's got a big, if and but that goes along with it. You can't do these things or listen to things that I'm saying if you haven't talked to your doctor, if you haven't talked to your therapist, and if you haven't had clearance to do these things. So I'm going to give you information I'm giving you now is very accurate and researched, but anything beyond the surgery date needs to come from your doctor, your therapist. I'm going to share with you my personal experiences, but I'm by no means telling you this is what you should do. I'm just going to give you some advice from what I have done, and then with the research that supports those things. But you need to follow your plan, not mine. All right, this is the end of Aging with Strength, episode 15. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you for parts 2 and 3 coming up soon. Take care of yourselves. Talk to you later. Thank you very much. See ya.